So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the government urge to fix the touring crisis in Europe, and this is related to Frost basically denying. There was an EU kind of agreement an agreement the EU were going to set up with us, which would be visa-free access for musicians either way, and then Frost said no, and then Frost kind of earlier in the year said maybe that wasn't the best idea. He didn't really admit to being wrong, but he talked about Liz Truss needing to get an agreement on visas. That would help a lot, but the other problem is you still need visas for touring staff, any like people you're going to bring with you, your entourage, and still the small matter of getting your equipment getting through the border as well. That's quite difficult. So the government should appoint a touring czar. Now, I don't know what the obsession the government has with czars, but people often do talk about the obsession the Tories have with Russia. This is to unravel the red tape facing British musicians in Europe, a cross-party group of MPs and peers have said. They would need to tackle the soaring costs of obtaining visas and transporting instruments that bands have encountered since Brexit. Now, I don't think there's much kind of in terms of making it easier to move around instruments. I don't know how much easier the EU can make that, because they still have to go through customs and things, but in terms of visas, absolutely something can be done there. Something should have been done there, but Frost said no. Some orchestras face bills of £5,000 every time they play abroad. Is that from country to country, or is that just moving, the equipment from England to, say, France? Do they have to pay to go to different countries, or is it a one-off payment until they come back to the UK? It added the industry faced a crisis that required urgent attention. Musicians and their crew were facing more costs, more complications, and getting fewer opportunities, because at the end of the day, if you're, and they talk about this in the article, if your equipment gets stuck at Dover, or there's nothing you can do, really. It's over 2 years since Brexit, yet there is still a mountain of red tape, said Labour MP Kevin Brennan. Ultimately, it's a self-inflicted wound that doesn't have to be there. The government was supporting, in response, the spokesperson said, the government was supporting the UK's brilliant musicians to adapt to the new arrangements and make touring easier, but they haven't, because otherwise Frost would have sorted it out by now, or Frost would have sorted it out at the time. But he didn't, and you've had musicians kind of complain about this for over a year now. I don't know if the EU's offer's still on the table. I think it's up to member states now. I know a few of them have given the UK easier access for musicians. I think Spain is one of them. I couldn't tell you about the rest. The rock band White Lies became painfully aware of the situation in April. Isn't that an ironic band name given the context of this story? The group who have a huge following in Europe had to cancel the first day of their tour after their equipment was caught in the border checks at Dover, and that's a big loss for them. In the words was Khalifa, get good show money because that's your money. This is how a lot of musicians make money, is through touring. It was a real disaster. Drummer Jack Lawrence Brown recalled, our truck containing all our equipment and all of our lights and the stage for the show got stuck in an enormous 2 or 3 day long queue, and there was no chance of the driver getting onto a boat in time to make the show happen, which was pretty devastating. And I'm sure like these bands that maybe go to America, that some of the bigger ones would be more used to this stuff. But yeah, given the situation at Dover, you've got 3-4 hour queues. I mean, you can't account for that stuff when you're transporting goods. Even this band said they tried to get things moving a bit earlier. It just didn't happen for them. Lawrence Brown said the band built extra time into their schedule to account for any post-Brexit delays, but it still wasn't enough. If your paperwork is wrong, or even if you have an IT system issue, which isn't your fault, your stuff can get stuck there for days. Your lorry driver could be stuck there for days, and it's unfair on them as well. He says, I just don't know how a newer band with less resources than us would ever cope with that kind of situation, because not only have they got the extra cost of visas, right? There's a band. I don't know how many of them are. You got probably 1, 2, 3, 3, maybe 4 people, right? You all get visas for each one. You got to get customs fees for all your equipment. If you've got a larger entourage, which most of these people do, it's expensive. He says we can just about shrug it off financially, and they lost one of their touring days as well. So that means they have to issue refunds. They wasted a day at a venue potentially, depending on how many days they booked out one venue for. Unless they're going to multiple different ones, again they have to pay out for that. He says, and as soon as you pull a show, it loses us money. So it was a big dampener to start a 7-week tour without the first show. That's a long tour they're going on, and it started off badly because of Brexit. It's Elton John who told the all-party parliamentary group that the government had squandered a golden opportunity to fix the issues around touring during COVID lockdown. I'm not 100% sure what he's talking about here, but the simple fact is this is on Frost. Last year, more than 200 artists, including Radiohead, Rick Astley, and Little Mix, launched a campaign called Let the Music Move, which argued that restrictions on touring Europe threaten the future success of the British music and could result in the collapse of the industry. And the music industry generates a lot of money for British exchequer. And the simple fact is, you're going to have less European musicians coming here, which means less money for us, but also, less money for these musicians going into Europe, touring around Europe, which they're still taxed here. Just because they do tours over here doesn't mean they're not taxed here. They are taxed here as well. Income tax. Well, you'd hope they pay income tax. Singer Katie Mellu told the campaign she had turned down several European TV appearances due to the uncertainty around over travel restrictions. She says, naturally, this has an impact on streaming numbers and physical record sales, she added. And that's true because, the first time I saw one of my favourite musicians, Example, it was on Channel 5, kind of one of those shows on Channel 5. If it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't have seen him as a musician. The live music business is estimated to employ 30,000 people in the UK, which doesn't sound like a lot, but some of these people would be on a lot of money. British artists play 4 times as many gigs in the EU as the US because Europe is closer and you wouldn't have needed visas and customs for all of your equipment, so it makes sense that they would do more tours in the EU as opposed to in America. Especially because I think it's easier for them to break into the kind of the EU market rather than the American one, which has a lot more artists, English-speaking artists as well. So the report says working with the EU to create a cultural touring agreement that would exempt musicians and their crew from red tape. And again, that could happen. The visa thing could happen. It's the equipment thing I'm more concerned about. The creation of a temporary support fund to help the industry deal with increased costs. But that's more socialism. You can't ask for government support. That's wrong. An expansion of the number of border points where goods, passports, and musical instrument certificates can be checked. And what they're asking for effectively is special treatment for their goods to have their own lane. That's not going to happen. Have you seen how small the Port of Dover is? Let's be honest. Unless they go through a complete separate airport or something. Brennan said that musicians hadn't been a big enough priority for the government, and at the end of the day, they don't care about the arts. Whatever you class music as, arts and that kind of genre. They never have done, not for a while. Although it's true that touring has become a little bit easier in some countries than it was immediately after Brexit, it's still an extremely complicated and patchy picture, Brennan told the BBC, and that's true. That certain countries have given, the UK kind of, I think it's a bilateral agreement on visas. It's not up to the EU Commission, it's up to individual member states. But again, the equipment thing is still not being talked about enough, I think. A government spokesperson said, following our engagement, 24 EU member states, including the biggest touring markets such as Spain, France, Germany and the Netherlands, have confirmed they offer visa and work permit free routes for the UK performers and other creative professionals. But evidently it doesn't appeal to enough bands, or there's certain qualifications you need to have. Maybe your band has to have a certain amount of sales or whatever in order to get visa free access, which means you still have to go through paperwork, you still have to go through the application process, which is time consuming. It costs a lot of money. You're going to have to pay someone to help you sort that stuff out, which again, before you wouldn't have to do that. 24 out of 27, so there's still a few that haven't got it. But the simple fact is, it's not as easy as the government are making out here. Just like it's not as easy when they did that customs video to export things. And the government haven't acknowledged the difficulty of exporting, their equipment to the EU as well, because again, that goes through customs. You have a lot of money you have to pay for that stuff to get through, and it's your own equipment. It's your own equipment you're paying just to move across the border. It's genuinely insane. I remember there was one story about a guy who he forgot his sunglasses. I think it was in Spain. He got the hotel to post it back to him, and he had to pay like VAT on the price of the sunglasses. VAT and customs fees. I think it cost him over £100. It was wild. I don't even know how much the sunglasses were even worth. I think he just sent them back in the end because it wasn't worth it. But it shows you the kind of insanity of this situation. And I think this BBC article really should have mentioned that we had the chance to have this issue resolved from the jump, but Lord Frost said no. That's what this BBC article should be talking about, but they're not, and that's really shameful journalism. Shameful journalism. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.